My grandson, Micah, pressed something into my palm under the table on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of Sunday where the light comes through the kitchen window slow and yellow and you think nothing in the world could possibly be wrong. He was 11 years old. His hand was small and clammy and shaking so hard I almost dropped the folded paper before I understood what he was doing. I'm 71. My name doesn't matter much for what I'm about to tell you. But my wife of 46 years called me Cal. And that's what I'd answer to if she walked through the door right now. She passed in February, 14 months before that Sunday. Pancreatic cancer. 8 weeks from the diagnosis to the day I held her hand and watched her breathing change, and then stop. I am telling you this because you have to understand the shape of the man I was when my grandson slipped me that note. I was hollowed out. I was running on routine. I drank my coffee at 5:30 every morning because that's when I'd always drunk my coffee. I walked the dog at 6 because the dog still expected it. I went to my son's house for Sunday dinner because that's what my wife had wanted. And I was still living, mostly, by the things she had wanted. My son Beau is 44. He's an engineer at a company that does something with municipal water systems. He married a woman named Renee about 9 years ago, after his first wife left him. And they have 2 boys, Micah and the younger one, Asher, who's 7. I had never warmed to Renee, and I knew that was a failing in me because she had never given me a real reason. She was polite. She remembered my birthday. She kept a clean house and brought casseroles to the funeral, but there was something behind her eyes that I had never been able to read. And a man my age learns to trust the things he can't read. That Sunday, I had been at their dining room table for maybe 20 minutes. Beau was at the head, Renee at the foot, the boys on either side of me. We were eating a pot roast Renee had made. I remember the pot roast specifically because she had made it 3 Sundays in a row, and she'd never made pot roast before in 9 years, and I'd never said I liked pot roast. And I'd been sitting there wondering in the dim back-of-the-mind way you wonder about small things why she'd suddenly decided that pot roast was now a tradition. That's when Micah pressed the paper into my hand. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes down on his plate, and he reached his arm under the tablecloth, and he pushed the paper into my palm. And then he pulled his hand back fast, like he'd touched a stove. I closed my fingers around it without thinking. 46 years of being married to a woman who liked surprises had taught me how to keep my face still. I tucked the paper into my pants pocket, and I cut another piece of pot roast, and I asked Renee if she'd used a different cut of meat this time, because I could swear it tasted different. She smiled at me. Same recipe, she said. I wonder if it's the cooking time. I said it was wonderful. I drove home at 4:30. I live about 12 miles from Beau and Renee, in the same house my wife and I bought in 1981, a yellow ranch on a half-acre lot with a maple tree out front that's older than my marriage. I made it through the drive. I parked in the garage, and I closed the garage door, and I sat in the driver's seat for a long minute before I took the paper out of my pocket. It was a sheet of notebook paper, folded twice. The handwriting was my grandson's careful schoolwork handwriting, the kind you do when you want a teacher to be able to read it. Grandpa. Check the storage place off Ketlin Lan. Unit 113. The key is under the Birdashvens, your backyard. Go before Thirdeshson, your backyard. Go before third is a please don't tell dad or mom. I love you. I read it 3 times. I sat in my car in my own garage and I read it 3 times, and then I read it again. Storage place off Kettle Lane. I knew the place. It was one of those long, flat-roofed compounds with rolling metal doors, run by a man named Kowalski, who'd been there since the 80s. I drove past it most days when I went to get gas. Unit 113. The key is under the birdhouse in your backyard. I didn't even know there was a key under the birdhouse in my backyard. I had a birdhouse. My wife had bought it at a craft fair in Asheville about 12 years ago. It hung off a metal hook on the post of our back deck. I had never moved it. I had never thought about it. I sat there for a long time. Long enough that the automatic light in the garage clicked off, and I had to wave my arm to make it come back on. I think part of me wanted to go straight inside and call Beau and ask him what the hell was going on, but a bigger part of me, the part that had noticed the pot roast, and the look behind Renee's eyes, and the shaking in my grandson's hand, told me to keep my mouth shut. I went around the side of my house instead of through it. I unlatched the back gate and I walked across my own yard in my Sunday shoes and I lifted the birdhouse off its hook. There was a key taped to the underside with a strip of silver duct tape that had gone yellow at the edges. A small brass key, padlock kind. Someone had put it there a while ago. I sat down on the back steps with that key in my hand, and I tried to figure out what I was looking at. My grandson knew about a storage unit I didn't rent. My grandson knew there was a key under my birdhouse. My grandson, 11 years old, was scared enough to slip me a note under his own dinner table. I went inside, and I made myself a cup of tea, and I poured it down the sink without drinking it, because my hands were shaking, and I couldn't trust myself with hot liquid. Then I sat in the kitchen until it got dark, and I thought about my wife, and I thought about what she would have done. She would have gone to the storage unit. That's what she would have done. She would have gone before Thursday, like the boy said, and she would have been quiet about it, and she would have figured out what the hell was going on before she lit any matches. I went on Monday morning. I told my neighbor I was going to the hardware store. That was the first lie I told in service of this whole business, and it would not be the last. The storage place looked the same as it always did. Long rows of orange painted doors, cracked asphalt, a chain-link fence with a sign that said, "No trespassers after dark." There was no one in the office. I walked down the row and I found Unit 113 between Unit 112 and Unit 114, which is exactly where you'd expect it to be. And I bent down and I put the brass key in the padlock and I turned it, and the lock came open in my hand. I want to tell you what I felt at that moment because I think it matters. I was not afraid. I should have been afraid. Any sensible man in his 70s bending down to open a storage unit he did not know existed should have been afraid. But what I felt was a kind of slow, heavy tilting, the way a ship feels when the cargo shifts. I felt my whole life tilting towards something, and I rolled up the door. The unit was lit by a single bare bulb on a pull string, and I had to pull it 3 times before the bulb caught. There were no boxes, there was no furniture. There was a card table in the middle of the concrete floor, and on the card table there was a green metal lockbox. And propped against the lockbox, there was a manila envelope with my name on it. Just my first name, Cal, written in handwriting that wasn't my grandson's. It was a woman's hand, loopy and careful. I picked up the envelope. There was a folding chair in the corner. I dragged the folding chair to the table, and I sat down and I opened the envelope, and I started to read. What was inside that envelope took me an hour to get through, and another 2 hours to understand, and the rest of my life to stop thinking about. The first thing was a printed copy of my own medical records, my most recent ones, blood work from the appointment I'd had in January, the appointment my daughter-in-law had driven me to because I'd been feeling tired and Beau had been at work. There were notes in the margins, not the doctor's notes, someone else's notes. In pencil, in that same loopy woman's handwriting, liver enzymes elevated, good, pattern consistent, and lower down he bruised on his arm last week. Pattern consistent. The second thing was a printed copy of my will. The current one, the one my wife and I had revised together 6 years ago. It left the house and a portion of our savings to Beau, and a smaller portion in trust for the boys, and a charitable bequest to the hospice that had cared for my wife. There were notes on this one too. House valued at $422K. Trust accessible at 18 unless modified. Modify trust to accessible at 25. Modify charitable to discretionary. The third thing was a printed page from a website I had never visited. An article titled Common Symptoms Mistaken for Aging in Men Over 70. 3 of the symptoms were highlighted. Fatigue, easy bruising, mental fog. The fourth thing was a printed photograph of me sitting in my recliner in my own living room, asleep, with a coffee mug in my hand. The photograph had been taken from across the room. I had not known anyone was taking it. The fifth thing was a printed photograph of me at the grocery store, then one at the post office, then one at my wife's grave, then one walking the dog. 11 photographs in all, taken over what looked like several months, in different clothes, in different weather. The sixth thing was a small spiral notebook, pocket-sized, The kind a waitress carries. It was full of entries in that same loopy hand. March 14. 2 drops in coffee. He napped 3 hours. No complaints. March 21. 3 drops. He said he felt foggy. Bo noticed. April 2, 3 drops. Bruising on left forearm. April 9th. Switched to capsule. 1 cap in tea. He drinks tea every Sunday. Easier. April 16. He looked confused at dinner. B asked if he'd been sleeping. Good. April 30th. Started mentioning to B that Cal seems off. B agrees. May 7. B said maybe Dad needs to see someone. Mentioned the assisted living brochure casually. May 14. Left brochure on the counter when Cal came over. He saw it. Reaction good. May 21. 2 caps. He left dinner early. Said he was tired. I read every page of that notebook. There were 43 entries. They went all the way back to the week after my wife's funeral. I sat in that storage unit on a folding chair under a bare bulb, and I read about my own slow poisoning in a woman's careful, loopy handwriting. The lockbox on the table was not locked. I opened it. Inside, there was a small bottle of something with no label, half full of clear liquid. There was a strip of capsules, also unlabeled. There was a printed life insurance policy in my name, naming Bo as the sole beneficiary, taken out 14 months earlier, 2 months after my wife died, in the amount of $600,000. The signature on the policy was mine. I had never seen the policy in my life. There was also a letter, handwritten. The same loopy hand. Cal, if you are reading this, you have a friend you didn't know you had. I won't say who I am because it wouldn't help you. I worked at the pharmacy on Vine Street until last month, when I was let go for what my employer called boundary issues. I started keeping notes on the prescriptions and the inquiries that crossed my counter, because I have been in this town a long time and I know more than my employer wishes I knew. Your daughter-in-law came to my counter 11 months ago asking questions about a substance that does not exist in the form she described, but exists in another form. I told her we did not carry it. She found it elsewhere. I do not know how. I have been watching since. The photographs in this envelope I did not take. I found them in a folder in your daughter-in-law's car when she came in for a refill and left her purse open on my counter while she took a phone call. I photographed them with my phone in the 90 seconds she was outside. I am not proud of this. I tell you so you understand. The notebook I copied from her glove compartment over the course of 3 visits. Forgive my hand. I copied as fast as I could. The medical records I obtained through means I will not describe. The will I do not know how she has. The life insurance policy I obtained from a man who works at the brokerage and owes me a favor for a reason that does not concern you. I have rented this unit for 3 months. The key is taped under your birdhouse, because I walked into your backyard 6 weeks ago when you were out, and I put it there myself. I am sorry to have trespassed. Your grandson knows because I told him. I am not proud of this either. I went to his school and I asked to speak to him, and I told him I was a friend of his grandmother and that his grandfather was in trouble, and that if he ever wanted to help his grandfather, he should remember the words, Storage Unit 1, 3, Kettle Lane, and Birdhouse, and Thursday. I told him I would put the rest in writing, if he was ever ready to know it. He was 11 years old, and he was the only person I could trust to tell you. I am sorry I had to use a child. I had no other tool. I am telling you all of this because you are running out of time. The notebook entries indicate a planned acceleration. Your wife's death from cancer was a natural death. Yours will not be allowed to look that natural unless you do something. I have done what I can. I cannot do more. I'm sorry about your wife. She was kind to me once at the farmer's market when I was new in town, and I was crying because I could not afford the strawberries my daughter wanted. She bought them for me, and she did not make me feel small. I have not forgotten. Be careful. Be smart. Don't go to the police yet. They will not believe an old man with a notebook and some photographs against a respectable woman with a husband and 2 children. You need more than this. I have given you a beginning. A friend. I sat in that storage unit for a long time after I finished reading. The light bulb hummed. A car drove past on Kettling. Somewhere a dog barked. I sat with the notebook in my lap and I tried to think. And I couldn't think because every time I tried to think, the only thing I could see was Renee at the foot of her own dining room table, smiling, asking me if I was sleeping well, putting another scoop of pot roast on my plate. The pot roast. The pot roast that she had made 3 Sundays in a row, that she had never made before in 9 years. The pot roast that I had thought tasted different. I stood up and I walked to the corner of the unit, and I threw up into a plastic bucket that someone, the woman I suppose, had thoughtfully left there. When I was done, I wiped my mouth, and I sat back down, and I started to do something that I had not done in a long time, which was to think the way I used to think when I worked. I'd been a claims adjuster for 35 years. I retired at 67. I had spent my whole career figuring out when people were lying and how, and the thing I had learned was that you do not confront a liar before you have built your case. You do not show your hand. You let them keep believing they're winning, and you build, and you build, and when you finally bring it down on them, you bring it down all at once, with paper, with witnesses, with everything they can't talk their way out of. That was the moment, sitting in that storage unit on a folding chair, that I decided I was not going to die. I was going to bury my daughter-in-law instead. Legally, lawfully, with paper and with witnesses and with everything she could not talk her way out of. And I was going to do it before Thursday, because Thursday meant something to the woman who had written me that letter, and I was going to trust her on that. I left the unit. I locked it. I drove home a different way than I had come, by instinct, by old work habits I hadn't used in years. I stopped at a gas station, and I bought a disposable phone with cash. And I drove home, and I put the disposable phone in my sock drawer, and I made myself a sandwich. That night, I called my old friend Linus. Linus and I had worked together at the firm for 22 years, before he left to become an independent investigator. He was 68. He still worked. He picked up on the second ring, and he said, "Cal, it's been a while." I said, "Linus, I need a favor that's going to sound insane." He said, "Tell me anyway." I told him. I told him in a flat voice, the way you tell things to other professionals, leaving the emotion out so they can hear the facts. The dinner, the note, the unit, the notebook, the capsules, the insurance policy with my forged signature, the pot roast. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Cal, I'm going to come over tonight. Don't eat anything you didn't make yourself. Don't drink anything you didn't pour yourself from a sealed container. I'm going to be there in 2 hours. Hang on." He came at 9. He brought a small black bag. He took a sample of my hair, a swab from inside my cheek, a fingernail clipping. He took the strip of capsules and the bottle of clear liquid I'd brought from the storage unit, sealed in a plastic bag. He took the notebook. He took the photographs. He took the insurance policy. He looked at the will and he whistled low and he said, "She's planning to push for a guardianship, Cal. The note's on the trust modification. She wants you declared incompetent. The poison is to make you look incompetent before they push you out. The insurance is the second payday after they've had you in a facility for a year and you finally tipped over." I said, "How much time do I have?" He said, "If she's accelerating, not much." The notebook said acceleration. We need to move fast. But we need to move right. You can't go to the police yet. You need a lab result. You need the policy verified as forged. You need a forensic handwriting analyst on that signature. You need a doctor to test you for whatever's in those capsules. You go to the police with what you have right now, and they'll call your son, and your son will call your daughter-in-law, and she'll evaporate every piece of evidence in 12 hours. I said, "How long to get all that?" He said, 3 days if we don't sleep." I said, "Then we don't sleep." We didn't sleep. Tuesday morning, Linus drove me to a private lab 40 miles away that he had used in his own investigative work. The lab took my blood. The lab took the capsules. The lab said they could have results in 48 hours if we paid expedited. We paid expedited. Tuesday afternoon, Linus took me to a doctor he knew. Not my regular doctor. My regular doctor would have called my emergency contact. My emergency contact was Beau. Beau was married to Renee. The doctor he took me to was an old woman named Dr. Hewitt, who had retired from a hospital downtown and who now did consulting work, mostly for lawyers. She listened to my whole story without interrupting once. She examined me. She drew more blood. She said, "Mr. Cal, your liver enzymes are elevated. Your bruising pattern is consistent with low-dose anticoagulant exposure. You are not imagining this. You are being poisoned. I will write a letter." Tuesday evening, Linus took the insurance policy to a forensic document examiner he'd worked with for 15 years. The examiner spent 2 hours with the policy under various lights and lenses, and at the end of it she said, "The signature is not the signature on file in your other documents. It's a competent imitation, but the pen pressure is wrong, and 3 of the letter formations are inconsistent with your verified samples. I can testify." Wednesday morning, the lab called. The capsules contained a low dose of warfarin combined with a sedative. Both were prescription drugs. The bottle contained the same sedative in liquid form. My blood showed trace amounts of both substances. Warfarin is an anticoagulant. In a man my age, in steady low doses, it would cause exactly the symptoms I had been having. Easy bruising, fatigue, eventually a fall, a bleed, hospitalization, a slow decline. The notebook entries about the dosages matched what was in my blood almost exactly. Wednesday afternoon, Linus and I sat at my kitchen table with all of it laid out. The lab report. Dr. Hewitt's letter. The forensic examiner's preliminary findings. The notebook. The photographs. The medical records with the pencil notes in Renee's handwriting, which I had compared to a Christmas card she had sent us 2 years ago and which matched in every loop and slant. The forged insurance policy. The unlabeled bottle. The capsules. I called my lawyer. Not the lawyer who'd written the will. A new lawyer. A woman Linus had recommended, who specialized in elder financial abuse. Her name was Ms. Tyndall. She came to my house at 6 o'clock on Wednesday evening, and she stayed until midnight, and at the end of those 6 hours, we had drafted a complaint, a request for a temporary restraining order, a petition for emergency review of the insurance policy, a referral to the State Attorney General's Elder Abuse Unit, and a new will that revoked every previous instrument and left my entire estate to my grandsons in trust, with my old friend Linus as trustee. She said, "Tomorrow morning at 9 we file. By 10, the police will be at her door. By 11, the insurance company will have frozen the policy. By noon, this is over for her, Cal. But tonight, you cannot let her know. You cannot call your son. You cannot do anything to spook her." I said, "I know." She said, "There's one more thing. I want you wired tomorrow. Before we file, I want you to invite her over here on a pretense, alone, and I want you to record her admitting it. We have enough without it, but a recording will end the case before it starts. She'll plead. She'll do whatever the prosecutor wants. We won't have to drag your son and your grandsons through a trial." I said, "Beau." She looked at me. I said, "What about Beau?" She said, "Cal, I have to ask you this. Is Beau involved?" I sat in my own kitchen with my hands on my own table and I thought about my son. I thought about him as a baby. I thought about teaching him to ride a bike on the sidewalk in front of this very house. I thought about his face at his mother's funeral, how he'd looked at me like he was waiting for me to say something that would make it bearable, and how I hadn't been able to. I said, "I don't know." She said, "We'll find out tomorrow." I called Renee at 8 on Thursday morning. I made my voice tired and a little vague. I said, "Renee, I'm sorry to bother you, but I haven't been feeling well, and I wonder if you could come over for an hour. I think I might need to talk to someone about whether I should be living alone anymore." "I don't want to worry Beau yet." She said, "Oh, Cal, of course, I'll be there in 20 minutes. I sat in my recliner with a thin wire taped against my chest under my flannel shirt, and I waited. She came at 8:23. She brought a thermos of coffee. She poured me a cup before I could stop her. I held the cup. I did not drink. I told her I'd been having spells. I told her I'd forgotten where I parked the car at the grocery store last week. I told her I'd been bruising. I told her I was scared. She sat across from me on the sofa with her face arranged in a kind of soft sorrow that I now understood was the most carefully constructed thing I had ever seen. She said, "Cal, I think it's time we talked about this. Beau and I have been worried for months. We've been looking at some places. There's one in Westbridge that's beautiful. They have a memory care wing for when, for later. We just want what's best for you." I said, "Renee, can I ask you something?" She said, "Anything." I said, "What's in the coffee?" There was a moment, a small one. Her face did one thing and then did another thing, and the second thing was the one she chose. But the first thing was the truth. The first thing was a flicker of pure, cold calculation. It lasted maybe a quarter of a second. She said, "What do you mean, Cal?" I said, "What's in the coffee, Renee? Tell me what's in the coffee." She said, "Cal, I think you're confused. I think this is exactly what we've been worried about." I said, "I'm not confused. I have your notebook. I have the capsules. I have the bottle. I have the photographs you took of me asleep in this chair. I have the insurance policy you forged my signature on. I have a lab report on my own blood. I have a doctor who will testify. I have a forensic examiner who will testify. And I have a recording device under the shirt that has been running for the last 11 minutes, which is now 11 minutes and 10 seconds. So, I am going to ask you one more time, and you are going to tell me, because you have nothing left. What's in the coffee?" She was silent for a very long time. She looked at the coffee cup in my hand. She looked at the front door. She looked at me. She said, "How?" I said, "Micah." Her face went white. She said, "He's 11 years old." I said, "He's the bravest person I've ever known." She started to cry. I do not know if the tears were real. I do not know if anything she had ever shown me had been real. She said, "Cal, I was going to. I never actually." I said, "There are 43 entries in your notebook. There are trace amounts in my blood. There is warfarin in those capsules. Don't." She stopped crying. The face she made then was not a face I had seen before. It was the face under the face. She looked at me like I was a problem she had not solved correctly, and I understood for the first time, fully, what kind of woman my son had married. She said, "Beau doesn't know anything." I said, "I believe you." She said, "Don't do this to him, Cal. Don't do this to those boys. I'll leave. I'll disappear. I'll sign anything. Don't do this to your son." I said, "Renee, you did this to my son. The minute you decided to do it, you did it to him. I'm just the one who's making it visible." There was a knock at the door. 2 officers. Miss Tyndall had timed it perfectly. They took her in handcuffs out of my living room at 9:17 in the morning. She did not look at me as they walked her past my chair. I watched her go. I watched the police car drive down my street with my daughter-in-law in the back of it, and then I sat in my recliner and I cried for a long time. Not for her, but for my son, who was about to find out that the woman he had been married to for 9 years had been planning to kill his father. I called Beau myself, before the police could. I said, "Son, you need to come over. Now, don't ask. Just come." He came. He stood in my kitchen and I told him everything, slowly, with the documents on the table between us, and I watched my son's face go through every age I'd ever seen it. The face of him as a boy who'd broken a window. The face of him as a teenager who'd been caught lying. The face of him as a young man at his wedding. The face of him at his mother's funeral, and finally the face of a 44-year-old man who has just learned that his entire adult life has been a lie. Someone else was telling around him. He sat down on my kitchen floor, not at the table, on the floor, with his back against the cabinets, and he put his hands over his face and he made a sound that I'd never want to hear another human being make as long as I live. I sat down on the floor next to him. I did not say anything for a long time. When I finally did, I said, "I love you, son. None of this is your fault. We are going to get through this. The boys are going to get through this. I am still here. I am not going anywhere." He cried into my shoulder for an hour. My grandsons came to live with me that night, and they stayed for 4 months while their father pieced his life back together. Renee pleaded out, the way Miss Tyndall had said she would. She's in a state facility now. She will be there for a long time. The pharmacy woman, my anonymous friend, I never met. Linus tracked her down out of curiosity, but I asked him not to tell me her name. She had asked me not to know it, and I owed her that. Micah is 12 now. He sleeps in what used to be his grandmother's sewing room when he stays with me on weekends. We don't talk about that Sunday very much. Sometimes I see him watching me when he thinks I'm not looking, and I see in his face the weight of having been the one who saved his grandfather's life when he was 11 years old, and I worry about what that weight is going to do to him as he grows up. I am trying to be careful with him. I am trying to make sure he knows that he was a child and that no child should have had to do what he did, and that I love him for it. But I also forgive him for the parts of himself that being 11 and brave broke. Bo is doing better. He started seeing someone. The boys are okay. The house is louder than it was. My wife's recliner has Asher's stuffed elephant on it most nights now, and I have not moved it. I am 72 now. I'm writing this down because I think there are other people my age who are sitting at someone else's dinner table eating a pot roast that tastes a little wrong, and I want them to know. I want them to know that the small wrong feeling at the back of your mind is worth listening to. I want them to know that an 11-year-old can save your life. I want them to know that the woman at the pharmacy who saw something was right to act, even imperfectly, even by trespassing, even by frightening a child. I want them to know that you are not too old, you are not too tired, you are not too far gone. The man I was on that Sunday afternoon, hollowed out, running on routine, drinking my morning coffee because that's when I'd always drunk my coffee. That man was 4 months from being declared incompetent, and 8 months from being dead, and he is sitting here writing this to you instead, because his grandson was brave, and because a stranger was kind, and because a stranger was kind, and because, when the moment came, he chose to stand up. Whatever it is, you can stand up. That's the whole of what I have to say. I've thought a great deal, in the 1.5 years since that Sunday, about how a thing like this happens. Not the poisoning. The poisoning is simple. A person decided. A person acted. A person acted. A person kept a notebook. What I mean is the slow part before the poisoning. The years it took. Renee did not wake up one morning and decide to kill me. She drifted there, one small permission at a time, the way most people drift toward most things they end up doing. She let herself want what wasn't hers. She let the wanting harden. She let the hardening become a plan, and by the time she was sliding capsules into my Sunday tea, the woman who had once stood at her own wedding in a white dress and meant her vows had been worn down to almost nothing by the small daily yeses she had given to the worst part of herself. That is the part that frightens me. Not her, me, any of us. Because the small daily yeses are the thing. I think about Micah a lot, 11 years old. He could have stayed quiet. He had every reason to stay quiet. His mother was the one tucking him in at night. The grown-ups around him were all telling him a different story than the one he could see. And he chose, with a child's clean, unimpressive courage, to slide a piece of notebook paper across a tablecloth into his grandfather's hand. He did not know if I would believe him. He did not know if he would be punished. He only knew that something was wrong and that I was the one he could try to tell. I have learned late in life that what we call wisdom is mostly just the willingness to listen to the small wrong feeling at the back of the mind, the pot roast that tastes a little off, the smile that arrives a quarter second too late, the medical appointment your daughter-in-law insists on driving you to. None of those things alone mean anything. All of them together, listened to honestly, save your life. I have learned that strength in a man my age is not what I used to think it was. It is not loud. It is not fast. It is the quiet decision made in a folding chair under a bare bulb in a storage unit on Kettle Lane that you are not done yet. That you will pick up a phone, that you will call a friend, that you will build a case the way you used to build cases when you worked with paper and patience and a closed mouth, and that you will not flinch when the moment finally comes to lay it all on the kitchen table. And I have learned that goodness in this world is rarely a grand thing. It is a stranger at a pharmacy counter who notices something wrong and risks her job to write a letter she will never sign. It is a child who is afraid and tells you anyway. It is a son, broken open on his father's kitchen floor, who chooses to keep loving his children through the worst day of his life. These are not small things. These are the only things. And if I have any counsel left to give, it is this: be the stranger. Be the child. Be the son. Stand up when standing up is what's left.